Good afternoon and welcome back, people. How's it going? I'm Miles. Hope you've been doing well. Today I'm back with a video discussing a topic that has come up in many conversations I've had with other guitar players over the years, but has also just been a topic that is sort of wrapped in some uncertainty and confusion among students as well as very well-versed players that I've come across in my time as an educator and as a musician. And the topic that we're discussing today is what's right for me. An eight string guitar, a baritone guitar, or an extended ranged instrument such as this 8-string guitar. As far as defining differences between extended range instruments versus baritone guitars, a baritone, by its loose definition, is any instrument that is longer than a scale length of 27 inches. 27 inches and longer is within baritone range. This isn't necessarily always the case because you could certainly have a guitar that's a 27-inch scale tuned to standard tuning, not baritone tuning, which would be B standard or A standard, something much lower. But for the most part, for all intents and purposes, let's say 27 and up is baritone. And with extended range instruments, what you're dealing with is the initial 6 strings that you would have on your typical guitar, along with additional strings, either 7, 8, 9, in some cases 10 if you don't want to be heard. You only want to be heard by dogs, I guess. I don't know what you need a 10 string for. What would that even be tuned to? Like, is it a note? But the idea with an extended range instrument is that you have the already established set of 6 strings in that frequency range, but now you're adding additional strings and extending the range of frequencies that you have available to you. Almost like going from having a practice piano that only has a small number of keys to going to an 88 key full scale piano. You're going to have more options in terms of the octaves that are available to you in terms of note choices and how you're voicing certain chords and certain melodies. So the same thing applies with an extended range instrument. Now, there's not really a pros and cons list when it comes to comparisons between an extended range instrument versus a baritone, because in the right context, they can sound the same. And as far as the actual application of playing, you're not doing anything necessarily too different. If you've ever been curious, or perhaps you're in the market to invest in either an extended range instrument or a baritone guitar, depending on what applications you're looking to utilize it for, I want to offer up some considerations to keep in mind as far as what to expect from either one of the instruments. And so with that said, let's just jump right in. The first consideration to keep in mind is familiarity. As far as baritone guitars are concerned, the familiarity is going to be there because you're still dealing with 6 strings, and pretty much the layout of everything is going to be the same so long as you're in a familiar tuning. Like if you're used to playing a 6-string guitar that's in standard tuning and you're playing open chords, if you get a baritone guitar and you tune it down to, say, E standard an octave below or F sharp standard, something like that, still a standard tuning where everything is tuned to the same intervals, it's still going to sound the same. It's just going to be lower. So the familiarity is going to be there. The only real difference is that the length of the neck is going to be longer and probably the spread of the frets will be noticeably wider. It's not a big difference. It's still not as long of a scale, this guitar anyway, it's not as long of a scale as, say, a bass guitar, which would be typically about 34 inches. But it's a little bit wider. Not too wide that you can't play bar chords and still play around where you want to in the lower frets. But overall, this is much more familiar right out the gate. However, when it comes to extended range instruments like this 8-string that I have, you could find yourself in a position where it might take a little bit longer to get used to playing an instrument like this. Especially if you're like me and you're going from playing a 6-string guitar to just jumping straight to playing an 8-string. I wouldn't recommend it, but in my mind at the time I thought, well, if I want to play songs that are on a 7-string, I can still do that. I'm saving myself the purchase of an additional guitar. I actually told that story to Angel Vivaldi at a clinic once and he laughed about it. And I don't know. At the time, I had money for one guitar. I didn't have time to go out and buy a 7-string, get good at that, and then go and get an 8-string and work my way up that way. All right? So this is what I did. This is what I got. It works. It's fine. Now, admittedly, when I first got this guitar, when it first came in the mail, I took it out of the box, I picked it up, I felt how wide the neck was, and just put it down. I didn't play this guitar for maybe a week after I first got it, just because I didn't know what I was going to do with it. And there's still times like that where I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this instrument, because it's more than just a guitar with 2 additional strings. It's kind of its own instrument in a way. It's almost like a cross between bass and guitar. And in addition to the wider neck and just getting used to navigating the fretboard being this much wider sort of surface to go across, I also found myself getting kind of lost with my picking hand in terms of proximity to the low E string, and trying not to hit the F sharp down here, which happened a lot, especially when I was trying to bring this guitar with me to work. And I'm teaching students that are playing songs that are played on 6-string guitars, and they're learning open chords and stuff like that. And suddenly finding myself in a position where I don't know how to play an open G chord because I'm putting my second finger in the wrong place. It was just a mess. It took a lot of time to just get acclimated to playing it. However, it can be done. But another factor to consider when it comes to extended range instruments, especially nowadays, is that more often than not, you'll find that 7, 8, 9-string guitars, they're coming with fan frets. They have a multi-scale neck, and so what that means is that there's a lower scale length for the smaller strings, while the lower strings, the heavier strings, they have a longer scale length to kind of compensate in the way that we are with the baritone guitar, where it just has a completely longer neck. But with fan frets, it can be a little awkward to play with the frets being in this sort of like slanted diagonal manner going across the span of the neck in a fan sort of way. But I've seen plenty of people play fan fret guitars with no problem. I've heard that they're pretty easy to play once you get used to it. So it could just be a matter of just sitting down with it and playing it a little bit longer. And that leads us to our next section, playability, in regards to playing chords. Now, like I said before, with the longer scale length of the baritone, the chording on the neck is going to feel slightly different because everything's spread out a little bit wider, but it's not too far off than what you would be experiencing when you're playing on a standard scale electric guitar or acoustic. And in lower tunings, the longer scale length is going to offer better intonation across the entire length of the fretboard. As far as playing chords in an extended range instrument, something that you want to keep in mind going into it is that, let's say you're taking a bar chord shape that you have stemming from the A string and you're going to move it up to the low E string. You could take C minor and move that up to low E, and that'll give you a G major bar chord. However, you can't necessarily do this same sort of approach when it comes to moving that same framing up to what would be your B string, and so on and so forth. So certain chords have to be played in a different manner depending on what you're trying to do. I also find it difficult to get a good sound out of bar chords that are being extended across a wider fretboard, but what I've also seen from other guitar players that play extended range instruments is that typically they don't use bar chords. You'll find that they're using power chords, or they're using other sort of triad versions of chords to get the chording intervals that they want. However, there are exceptions to the rule. Take Tosin Abasi, for example, from Animals as Leaders, who will tune his 8-string guitar, he'll tune the F sharp string to E, and if he plays an A bar chord, he can extend his first finger forward to cover both the now lower E string, and the B string, and get this really fat sounding A chord, because it has all the intervals that he initially started with, just in a lower frequency range. But something to consider when it comes to either 8-string or baritone guitar is where you're playing chords in general. Because as you go lower in frequency, what happens is that the relationship between your intervals is not going to be lined up the same way as it would be if you were playing in A440. So you'll find with a lot of heavier bands, when they're playing the chorus of a song or they're using a lot of distortion and stuff like that, they won't be playing chords, they'll be playing single notes and just hitting heavy on one string. And it's not necessarily because they're not talented. It mostly stems from the fact that chords don't sound that great in lower frequencies because the frequencies just aren't matched up the same way. So that's just something else to keep in mind. Then there's the consideration to keep in mind when it comes to playability as far as soloing. When it comes to extended range instruments, if you're used to playing solos on a 6-string guitar and going up into the higher register and having the notes sound a certain way, you're still going to have that with an extended range instrument, because let's not forget, the first 6 strings that are on there are the same that would be on your typical 6-string guitar. So in a way, if you're the type of player that wants to play heavy riffs, but also wants to be able to play solos that sound like Steve Vai or whoever else, you pretty much have the best of both worlds with an extended range instrument. However, you want to keep in mind that with the introduction of these lower, thicker strings, that there's more room for noise and just resonance from the instrument itself as you're playing on the higher strings. So you'll see guys using things like this, a fret wrap that keeps the other strings that you aren't playing from vibrating and making unwanted noise. A prime example of someone utilizing a fret wrap for this reason would be Lucas Mann of the band Rings of Saturn. And as far as playing solos on a baritone guitar, it can be done, but bear in mind that if you're used to playing solos on a 6-string guitar that's tuned to standard tuning, and now you're tuning lower, understand that all those notes that you've tuned are all going to be lower. The higher register gets lower as well as the lower register of the string. And so if you're used to your solo sounding a certain way, it's not necessarily going to sound the same now. It's not a bad thing, it's not musical in its nature, it's just different. And if it's a kind of different that you're not looking for, then maybe you'd be better suited with an extended range instrument over a baritone. This next topic actually popped into my head during a discussion that I was having with a former student of mine years ago, when they were asking me about why I would take my guitar and tune it down versus just utilizing my 8-string and just relearning all these songs in a lower register on one instrument so that I don't have to switch guitars ever. Which, yeah, I mean, for certain players, that would be a more beneficial option to consider. But for me, as the guitarist and also the singer in my band, I'd rather just be able to know where my fingers are on the neck of the guitar, which strings I'm plucking with my pick, and not have to worry about looking down and making sure that I'm not hitting B or F sharp while I'm singing. But the other factor that's involved in all of this would be harmonics. Now, as far as the harmonic layout on either one of the guitars, it's going to be the same no matter what. You go to the 12th fret on a guitar, you're going to get a 12th fret harmonic. Same thing at the 7th fret, 9th fret, 5th fret, the other frets as well, just less pronounced. The harmonic series hasn't changed. It's just a matter of what notes are going to be produced depending on what you have the string tuned to. So if you're playing songs that in standard tuning utilize harmonics within the single notes or chords that you're playing, but now you want to just transpose it to a lower tuning, a lower pitch, a baritone guitar is going to do that just fine, and everything's going to be in the same layout, and you're not going to have to worry about having to relearn any parts of the song in a different way. However, if I'm playing a guitar that's tuned to C sharp standard, and I have harmonics that are being played on the 5th fret of G and the 7th fret of B, within a particular phrase that I'm playing, those harmonics aren't going to be available on a standard tune 8-string guitar. So what I can do from there is either continue playing on the one guitar that's tuned lower, or I figure out a new way to play it on my 8-string. And that's something that I'd rather not do. The less I got to think about when it comes to playing in a live environment, the better. The more that I can just focus in on my performance, the better. I don't want to have to worry about like small details and mechanics and rearranging things on the fly. So that's something that's worth considering as well. Over the past 15, 20 years, it seems there's been more of an inclusion and acceptance of extended range instruments as being part of the mainstream in terms of instruments that are in demand by the public. And so with that said, there's been more manufacturers making extended range instruments as well as providing strings for those instruments as well. However, I can't necessarily say the same thing for baritones, because it seems like not just amongst consumers but also amongst some companies there seems to be a misunderstanding of what would be needed for a baritone instrument. Like, for example, the neck is longer, so the string should probably be longer too, right? And not just string length, but also the gauge of the individual strings. There was a time that if you wanted a specific gauge string set for your guitar and no companies had them readily available, already pre-packaged, you would go to the store and you would buy individual strings. You would make your own packs. And in some cases, depending on what you're trying to do with the instrument, whether it be an extended range or a baritone, you'll still have to go out and do that. But there are some offerings from Stringjoy, and I forget who else, as far as baritone strings. I know with my guitar right now, I have the Diodario baritone set on this, and it's not bad. There's still some things that I'm not crazy about, and I think maybe I need something that's a little bit thicker. But granted, I'm still experimenting. However, if you're looking for more specific information regarding string gauge in relation to scale length with baritone guitars, I'd recommend checking out the Bunn, as well as my buddy Steve over at Gear Stuff and Things. And as I mentioned before, there's definitely more options available when it comes to extended range instruments, at least in regards to 7 and 8 string guitar. As far as 9 and beyond, you're probably going to be making yourself custom sets, if not just going out and getting an additional string to go with an already established 8-string set. But nowadays, there's definitely more options as far as heavier gauge strings that you can get individually that are available at the music shop. And the prepackaged sets, there's different ones for different purposes. I know that when I first got my 8-string, I went through a series of different gauges and different tunings and ideas, just trying to figure out what was going to work best for me. I had a series of motivating factors when it came to my first sort of dive into playing 8-string guitar. The first being my discovery of animals as leaders and wanting to play Wave of Babies and Kafo and just wanting to do that stuff, but knowing that I couldn't do it on my 6-string guitar. And then I discovered the band Glass Cloud, and I met Josh Travis. Talked to him for a little bit, discussed what was going on with everything that he was doing. And that man has got a lot of things going on as far as tunings, string gauges, and just his approach to the 8-string guitar and a 9-string at the time as well. Yeah, so I went through a whole bunch of different avenues as far as string gauges, tunings, and just everything in general. So those options are available, and, feel them out. See what works for you. You never know. Now, a factor that I didn't consider right away when it came to either one of my guitars is cases. As far as my 8-string guitar is concerned, when I first got it, I'd already had a Schecter, and those guitars, the headstock on Schecters tends to be fairly large compared to a Strat or a Telecaster. And so I would go for a bigger case anyway. Not like a bass case, but something just a little bit taller. And so when I got a case for my 8-string guitar, I didn't have any problems. However, for some reason, when I bought my baritone, it never occurred to me to think, oh, the neck's longer, so I'll probably need a taller case. I don't know why I didn't think about that. But once I had this consideration in my mind, my first go-to as an option was the case that I have for my bass. And the baritone, while it fits in there, it doesn't fit comfortably because it's not tall enough. It's still got room to move around in there. So as far as getting a case for that guitar, I haven't gotten one yet, but I'll be talking to Steven and Scott about that as well. Try to find out if there's any good options that they know of. So this is definitely worth considering if you're in the market to buy yourself an extended range instrument or a baritone, especially with something like a multi-scale extended range instrument, because it could be taller than you anticipate it to be, and it won't fit in a regular guitar case. And the baritone won't, for sure. I know that now. Now, this last section has to do with your approach when it comes to recording and EQing your guitar tracks. Now, prior to getting a baritone or an extended range guitar, I was already recording music for a long time. And so with that in mind, my approach to recording was kind of streamlined to a point where I wasn't putting a lot of consideration into tweaking anything too much, because what I was doing was working, and so I wasn't trying to change it. However, when I got my hands on my 8-string guitar, I realized very quickly that I needed to make some adjustments because I was dealing with a wider range of frequencies that are all acting in very different ways. So before I ever got my hands on an extended range instrument or a baritone guitar, I was already recording music, and I had an idea of what guitars should sound like when it comes to recording and how to get them to sound good and all stuff of that nature. And so I did things one way for a long time. But then when I got my hands on my 8-string guitar, things had to change. And I realized after I made a couple recordings with it, trying to get the most brutal sounds I possibly could from it, that I was focusing in on a certain frequency range that was causing another frequency range to be lacking. And so what you need to do, because you have this full range of frequencies to deal with, is try to find a balance where the high frequencies are being pronounced and sounding the way that they should without sounding tinny and thin, and do the same for the low frequencies without them sounding muddy and washed out. And so there was a bit of a learning curve in terms of finding that balance, in terms of getting the guitars to sound better in the mix in relation to drums and bass and vocals. But obviously it can be done. There's countless bands that are out there playing 8 and 9 string guitars that have both bass and vocals. So, it's just a different approach that you need to keep in mind. And so I find with the baritone, I have less to think about, but I've also found my 8-string that when it comes to rhythm tracks versus solo tracks, I'll just do 2 different tones altogether. And I'll do all the EQ of everything in the mix later on. But as far as the initial approach, I try to tweak it out so that everything is appropriate for the application that I'm using it for. But if you're looking to find out more information when it comes to recording and producing and just getting your guitar tracks to sound better, I would suggest you check out my buddy Nick Hill. He's recording all the time. He does live streams, and his riffs sound brutal. It just sounds awesome. Everything he does sounds great. I'll leave a link to his channel in the description down below. I have all these friends on YouTube now. This is what it's like to have friends, huh? Finally made it. I'm finally part of social society. And with that, guys, that's all I got for you for today. Hopefully you found this video to be informative and helpful in your pursuit of either an extended range instrument or a baritone, or both. I would say just get both. Then you have both, and you can use them for different things. But yeah, if you liked what you saw today and you haven't already, hit that like button. Win. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. I got more stuff coming in the near future, so I don't want you to miss it. All right? And if you would like to support the channel further, I will leave a link in the description for my Patreon down below as well. You can go over there and check out all the perks that would be attached to your support. But other than that, friends, that's all I got for now. Thank you again for your time. Check out my buddies. Their channels are linked down below. I'll see you in the next one. Keep playing. Peace.